The Swan Princess. During the 1990s, back when Disney was the undisputed kings of animation during their renaissance, it's no surprise that there would be many others that want to copy their formula in order to create their own animated musicals. A lot have tried, but a lot also failed. However, among those copycats, there were actually a few that did manage to find their own success, and even gather their own cult following that's still prominent to this day. In the case of the Swan Princess, that one found its fame in a more interesting way. Based on the Tchaikovsky ballet Swan Lake and created by former Disney director Richard Rich, the film did not have a great start. Critics were iffy on the movie, and the film wasn't strong enough to compete against other movies at the time, and resulted in a big box office bomb. It wouldn't be until its VHS release when Odette found her moment of glory and became the non-Disney princess star she was destined to be. So much so that the movie spread its wings to become its own animated franchise with a couple of direct-to-video What the fridge? Where did all these sequels come from? There's way too many Swan Princess sequels! Why are there so many Swan Princess sequels? The brochure said there'd only be a few Swan Princess sequels! This is a terrible Family Guy reference! Anyways, so now that it's time for the film to show its magic, will it be as elegant and graceful as a swan? Or will it be honking its way to cause frustration like a goose? Let's find out. The story. At first glance, this may seem like your average fairy tale-like fantasy family film with a princess, magic, funny animal sidekicks, and a quest for everlasting love. However, when going deeper into it, there's actually very little story to be told. Granted, it does have an interesting concept that would allow to tell a compelling love story of a princess's quest to be with her prince, but the direction makes it seem like it doesn't have a whole lot of ideas to tell this story. The biggest issue with the plot is that it often has a bad habit of stalling. Each scene is pretty basic to explain what's happening, yet they fill so much of that time not on further developing that explanation, but rather on musical numbers and slapstick comedy. Now, it's pretty common for an animated film of its time to have stuff like that, but again, it's the poor execution of them that makes all those moments feel less engaging or enhancing the experience, and more just for the sake of hitting that 90-minute mark. And whenever it does take that time to actually get into the story, it goes heavy on the exposition to just spell out what is happening. Revealing another problem with the feature, that its lack of subtlety can make the movie feel like it's talking down to its audience.
I will make a vow of everlasting love. Thought you could fool, Rothbart.
And then there is the comedy of the film, since it did spend as much or even more time on that than telling the actual story. And that can be a bit weak. As the humor mainly goes for cartoony slapstick, the result of them are less funny and more juvenile, especially when they feel out of place for the kind of feature it wants to be. Like, the fairy tale style storytelling wants to be more like Disney, while the comedy wants to be more like Looney Tunes, resulting the two to not mix well and have its direction be a bit all over the place. But I will say that there are times when it does get funny, especially with Roger's sarcasm, so it is possible to get a few chuckles out of this. Also, there is one thing I have to give credit to the story. Despite mostly not told well, it did have a really good start. The first 12 minutes set everything up well about how Odette and Derek met and how they've grown from hating to liking each other over the years, along with going into what their connection would mean to the kingdoms and their people, giving both the plot and its main characters a rich backstory that could have made their relationship more interesting later on. It was off to a good start to present a potentially strong story, but once the actual core of the feature kicks in, that's when the direction turns it into something that's far less appealing. The animation. If there's one component of this film that's trying the most to be like Disney, it's easily the animation. But for one of those Disney copycats of the 1990s, the visuals are pretty good. Not great, but still pretty solid on its own. Some could argue that it would have some points off for unoriginality by copying Disney a little too much, especially when the art direction has some suspiciously strong resemblance to Beauty and the Beast, from some of the clothes to the background designs. That, and even the character designs seem like something that came straight out of Disney, but not up to that level of quality. The characters look like they came out of a decent Disney fan art you'd find on social media. It's impressive, but would still need some work to truly feel like Disney. Okay, I'll stop with the Disney comparisons because maybe it is a little unfair to do that for everything. In fact, it is understandable how it got that Disney look, since the director and many animators who worked on this actually previously worked at the studio, so it does explain why the movie almost nailed the look. At the same time, there are other elements that did do well on its own. Probably the moments that stand out the most visually are the effects, especially when this is a film that requires a lot of magic, like transforming Odette into a swan. As for the character animation, again, it is a strong effort. Not necessarily the smoothest or the highest quality, but does try its best whenever the scene asks to be more down-to-earth with the royals, or to let loose with the squash and stretch whenever the slapstick is needed. But it is in the musical numbers where the animators had to work the hardest to get those scenes right. That's when the quality gets a little boost, and when the film gets the most creative with what it wants to do. If you want to know when the characters get the most animated, where the magic is most prominent, or how the film presents a strong use of camera angles and choreography, then find the spots where they sing. While it's not the best animation of its time, especially when it tries too hard to emulate the style of Disney, the film does provide some well-crafted visuals. The characters. One of the key moments in the feature is the opening when Odette and Derek first fall in love. But when it was time for Derek to prove that he loves Odette outside of her physical beauty, the only thing he could respond is,
"What else is there?"
As shallow as that was, that's unfortunately the best way to describe these characters. The more you hang out with them, the more you wonder if there's anything more to them outside their one-dimensional trait. As I've said before, the opening beautifully set up the backstory of Odette and Derek, whose parents tried for years to make them connect so that the two kingdoms can eventually unite. But once the plan does work and love struck the two, it also struck down their chances to grow as characters, and all that's left of them throughout the rest of the picture is just two hopeless romantics who will do anything to get back together again. There's also unfortunately not a whole lot to say about the others as well. Like, Rothbard is the generic evil sorcerer that aims to rule the kingdom, and optionally to force the princess into marriage and has a crazy old woman as an assistant. And then there are the comic reliefs, and oh boy, this is one of those movies that think they could solve all their problems by showering this with comic reliefs. However, they do come with some mixed results, so not all of them end up falling flat. You got Bomley, Queen Uberta, and Jean Bob, who only have one joke throughout the picture. Speed and Puffin are in that awkward middle where they can either be enjoyable or their gags fail. And then there's Rogers, who is hands down the funniest character and the one with the best jokes. He stands out from the others because his style of humor is witty sarcasm, which can be a breath of fresh air after going through consecutive sets of bad slapstick comedy.
It was dumb, I know.
You should write a book. How to offend women in 5 syllables or less.
On a side note, some of these characters don't even have a proper introduction, which is especially the case of Jean Bob and Speed, coming in out of nowhere, and it's somehow already established that Odette is good friends with them. Although not as big of an issue as others, it is an example of how disjointed this movie can be, like it might have forgotten a scene or two while it's on its pursuit of making more comedy fluff. There can be a few likable things about the characters, but like Derek asked, what else is there? The songs. Of course, it's an animated film, it was released in the 1990s, it has that fairy tale theming, so it's gotta be a musical. However, when watching this movie, did anyone ever stop to think, does this have to be a musical? I'm sure the intentions were always to make it so, but because of the poor directing, the songs kind of feel like they were an afterthought, as if the movie doesn't know what to do for some particular scenes, so they decided to make them a musical number just to fill in the gaps. This is especially the case with songs like Practice, 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 No Fear, and Princess on Parade, where they contribute little to the feature itself, and the lyrics sound like they were written at the last minute, with the only context given when making them was just a short summary of what's happening.
We are a band, and not a band of animals. This masquerade
Is more than I can bear.
There goes my...
On a mission, we're tough in good condition.
We're short.
Standing tall.
No fear.
beguiling the smiling brigade.
Princesses on parade.
Then there are a few that are like the generic songs to add to these types of movies, like No More Mr. Nice Guy is the typical villain song. But I do find it funny how it's all in the tone of smooth jazz, because nothing's cooler than swinging to the beat of taking over the kingdom and destroying your enemies.
Well, let me pie. I haven't even started. No more Mr. Nice Guy. No, sirree.
As for This Is My Idea, it's an interesting case because for the movie, it works to establish the plot. But on its own, it's a 6-minute song that goes on for way too long.
So happy to be here. How I'd like to run. This isn't my idea of fun.
And then there's the main song of the feature, Far Longer Than Forever. A typical love ballad, yes, but it does stand out as the feature's best song, as this is the one that feels the most prepared, like it's meant to exist both on its own and for the movie.
Far longer than forever.
Far longer than forever.
I swear that I'll be true.
I swear that I'll be true.
In general, the songs on their own are not really terrible per se. Hardly memorable, but they fit in the category between decent and mediocre. They're also neither the best nor the worst parts of the movie. The only true purpose that they have is to just turn this film into a musical, rather if there's narratively a reason for it or not. Just like a real swan, it's a beautiful sight at first, but then once you take the time to actually get familiar with it, it's not as pleasant or lovely as it seems. The Swan Princess is just another Disney clone from the early 1990s, but comes with some mixed results. While it does supply a promising concept, a well-built opening, and some impressive animation, it doesn't even come close to the levels of the Disney films of its time due to the poorly executed story, uninteresting one-dimensional characters, and a set of unmemorable songs. While I would recommend more to just stick with the classics of the Disney Renaissance, the most I'd say when it's best to watch it, it's when you're in the mood for something Disney that's not from Disney, if you know what I mean. While I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the worst of these Disney ripoffs, since it does try a bit to have some quality, the only way I could sum this movie up is that it's just another forgettable Disney clone. What else is there? Hey guys, this is AniMat's, and I want to start things off by giving out a huge thanks to the Jazzman94, whose amazing support on Patreon allowed him to get some amazing rewards, including this one, where he got to ask me to go and review the Swan Princess. And honestly, I try to think about what else is there more to go and discuss about this movie, because I think I really covered everything up with the feature in the review itself. But there is one additional thing I would like to discuss that not many people have, and that is actually regarding the director, Richard Rich, because the more you look into him, and while there isn't a whole lot about him, he really is quite an intriguing figure in the field of animation, because, as we all know, Richard Rich, he started out working at Disney throughout the 70s and throughout the 80s, where his biggest claim to fame there was actually directing The Fox and the Hound, and then later The Black Cauldron. And he was supposed to go and direct Oliver and Company, but then he ended up getting fired, which his only response from there is to go full-on Don Bluth and try to run his own studio, while also bringing on board a lot of the animators from Disney to start his own studio. And from there, I would say that he kinda got success. Not really. Well, okay. It's a little bit complicated, but with the result of movies like The Princess and the Frog and a few others as well, like, he did manage to make a few movies of his own, like the one I just reviewed, and also another movie I did review a while back, The King and I, the 1999 movie. The thing with Richard Rich, though, is that while he never reached the same success as Don Bluth, he did manage to do decently well on his own. Like, not super successful, but at least manageable to run his own business. At least, like, it's something that's putting bread on his table and stuff like that. And even to this day, the most that Richard Rich is doing, like, his most recent credits as I am recording this, is literally just little franchise movies, little direct-to-video franchise movies of Alpha and Omega and the Swan Princess, of course. Which is kind of weird how it ended up getting a resurgence of popularity with even more sequels. Like, it started out with 2 direct-to-DVD films during the 90s after the first movie, and then suddenly we got, like, that one nostalgia-capturing feature with the Christmas movie, and then suddenly, like, right now, the Swan Princess is trying to catch up with The Land Before Time in terms of, like, accumulating more sequels. And believe it or not, while I was making this review, I actually just discovered that they're trying to make their own series. I don't think like a full-on TV series, but at least just a little thing on YouTube where they want to make and I kid you not, you can actually look this up, they want to make a Jean Bob show. Like, literally devote an entire series to the computer-animated Jean Bob. Which honestly is kind of weird, but I guess they really want to make the Swan Princess into the series. I mean, like, hey, as long as it's giving Richard Rich some work, then, I guess, like, what else can I say about that? Alright, now, I think that should cover up everything for this whole discussion about the Swan Princess. And now it is time that we are going to be jumping into the animation hat. Oh, and by the way, before I go and get into this, I would like to go and say that if you guys would like to be like Jezman94 and you would like to go and support my work and get some amazing rewards, including but not limited to watching my videos before anyone else, then all you have to do is go to patreon.com/animat. But at the same time, if you guys would like to suggest an animated film you would like me to review and I would put onto the animation hat, then just write me an email at animatsreviews@gmail.com. Alright, so let's see what we got. I think I just made a mess. I don't know. Like I saw in the corner of my eye, something fell. Okay, just one. Here you go. Back in the hat you go. But I did pick one, though. And this one shall be... Oh my, this is gonna get interesting, though. Okay, well, I mean, technically, I did review this movie, but I haven't reviewed the sequel yet. And this is going to be interesting because I do believe this one actually did get released in theaters. Maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but still, well, it's gonna be interesting getting back into this one. But I guess we're gonna go and get a little bit of an update on how Charlie is doing in heaven.
What else is there?